leave the scene. That is not a person that's trying to run an ICE agent over. You have a person that is trying to protect our city, to look out for our neighbors.
And Board Czar Tom Homan disagrees.
I truly believe that officer thought his life was in danger to take that action. Now, look, we won't let the investigation play out. You know, there's a lot of things we all don't know. There's probably a lot of video we haven't seen, but the FBI has, even ring video. What's the statement from the officer? What's the statement from the witnesses?
And the Minneapolis police chief says he actually agrees with Tom Homan in part, saying, quote, "We have to use caution and allow a full and impartial investigation to proceed here in Minneapolis." Rich.
Matt Finn live for us in Minneapolis. Matt, thank you. Well, it's not just Minneapolis. There are anti-ICE protests in cities across the country days after that fatal shooting incident. CB Cotton is in Midtown Manhattan. Another protest is planned for today. CB?
Hey, Rich, yeah, today's anti-ICE protest is happening here in an iconic part of the city. Take a look. You've got the Plaza Hotel this way, and then across the street, you can see Central Park. Take a look. All this, people are starting to unfold. People are starting to arrive. You can see some of these anti-ICE, anti-Trump signs out here. The group who created the No Kings movement that we saw last summer appears to be behind the protests here today. Again, people still starting to show up. So let's take a look at what we saw yesterday when a crowd of about 80 people marched through the streets next to the ICE New York field office, many of them carrying signs calling for ICE to be abolished or expressing anger towards the Trump administration. We saw no pro-law enforcement messages to counter these messages, and thankfully there were no violent clashes, but across the country, a different story. Overnight in Austin, Texas, our Fox affiliate was there as multiple people were taken into custody at a protest called End ICE Terror. And in Los Angeles, the LAPD reportedly had to issue a dispersal order and take several people into custody who refused to end the protest. You know, as these protests continue across the country, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem has said the agency won't be swayed from its work, doubling down that agents are making American streets safer. If today's protest goes how we saw yesterday, the people here behind me who are starting to gather will likely march around this immediate area several times, chanting their anti-ICE, anti-law enforcement messages. They'll come back here and they will do some more chants and some speeches. We're going to keep an eye on how things unfold here today. Rich, back over to you.
CB Cotton live for us right outside of Central Park in New York. CB, thank you. Well, for more on the protests and the investigation into Wednesday's shootings, Jonathan Fahey, the former acting ICE director, former DHS deputy assistant secretary, and also former federal prosecutor, now a partner at Holtzman Vogel Law Firm. Jonathan, thank you for joining us this afternoon. You saw some of these reports here. It's not even 20 degrees in Minneapolis, and there are people out protesting. More are expected to come. How long do you think federal officials are preparing to see these protests in the street?
I expect these protests, the Democrats are going to try to keep them going as long as they possibly can, because remember, their most important issue is not what happened with this incident, but their point, the Democrats want to prevent all deportations, essentially, so they are going to continue to fight ICE and find ways to stand in their way, and it really is sort of an activity of subversion, not just protesting, because everything they're doing is standing in their way to try to obstruct them and tacitly encourage violence. So I expect it will continue, and I'm glad what Secretary Noem says. ICE not only won't be deterred, they can't be deterred, because they have a responsibility and a duty under the law to enforce the immigration law, and they've been doing a phenomenal job, and we're seeing the results of that with these drastically low crime numbers. And you've seen some of the people deported or arrested in Minneapolis with these astounding records of child molestation, homicide, and things like that. So they are really making things safer, and they have to continue doing their job.
How much do these protests hinder what ICE is trying to do, and in a way, does it embolden ICE?
I think it hinders them in situations where they do things like block them in, interfere with them doing stuff because that makes it more difficult, or if they're doing things to alert other people that ICE is in the area, it's going to make it more challenging and more dangerous for them to get the most serious criminals off the streets. So yeah, it does make it harder, but I think the most important thing is for people to recognize what ICE is actually doing and how it's making us safer, and the crime numbers that we've seen this year really bear that out. And they've deported 400, I think, and 13,000 people that have criminal records, and we also have record low crime rates. I don't think it's a coincidence.
Jonathan, there's also this back and forth where 3 Democratic lawmakers, all from Minnesota, tried to get into an ICE facility there. ICE blocked them. They said, hey, you have to give us 7 days notice. Democrats are saying that's something that a court said is not a thing. You have to allow us unannounced visits. What's going on there?
Well, I think what ICE has seen in the past, and we remember earlier in this year, I think it was in Newark, where these lawmakers are going in there not to observe what's going on, but to disrupt what's going on and disrupt ICE from conducting their business. So they're using the visitations as a guise to try to disrupt things, but they will be allowed to visit facilities. And the one thing that they'll find out is ICE facilities are substantially safer than most state prison facilities, and the people there are being well cared for, but they are being detained, and they are illegal aliens, so they should be detained. But I imagine more of these standoffs, and we saw a lot in the beginning of the year. It sort of toned down, but maybe the Democrats are ramping this one up again.
You know, you also heard this back and forth between Democratic officials in Minneapolis and those within the administration here in D.C. saying that there needs to be an investigation into that shooting that happened in Minneapolis. The Minnesota officials are saying that FBI is locking them out of this and they're not going to be a part of this. What's happening there? What right do local officials have or state officials have to investigate what happened there?
Well, they have no right to be part of a federal investigation. They can have their own investigation, but they have no right to be a part of it. And if you think about it, why would the FBI invite the locals in when you have people like Tim Walz and Jacob Frey that call these agents the worst possible names and are clearly there just to disrupt them? And the FBI does these things all of the time. They don't need the help. And I think, so I think when you look at this, they're trying to sort of portray it as a way to have confidence in the result. But all you have to do is go back to the Michael Brown case, who Darren Wilson in that case, I mean, we're going back 10 years, but he was cleared by the Eric Holder Justice Department, and Hillary Clinton was still trouting out his family as props on the campaign trail, somebody that was unjustifiably killed by police. So there's no reason to bring them involved. The FBI will get to the bottom of this. It's a very serious situation, but it's not complicated. It matters looking at all the videos, looking at the forensics, and interviewing witnesses. So this is not a complicated investigation, and it doesn't need any of the state involvement. And again, the state can do whatever they want. They just don't have a right to be a part of the federal investigation.
Okay, Jonathan Fahey, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, now to the other big story we're following in Minnesota, the fraud scandal. After this week's big House oversight hearing, Senate Republicans are now demanding Governor Tim Walz provide a paper trail on the state's role in all of this. Also, the Department of Agriculture is suspending federal funding to Minnesota while the Trump administration launches new investigations. So, what are lawmakers hoping to learn? Let's bring in Republican Congressman David Kustoff from Tennessee. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. What is next on all of this? Do you think that House oversight is going to have an appearance from the governor and the attorney general in Minnesota?
Well, thank you for having me on today. These two public officials need to come forward and answer a lot of questions. I mean, you go back in time 1 week to Governor Walz's announcement that he's not going to run for re-election, all as a result of this scandal with which he downplayed in the days and weeks prior to it becoming a major national news story. So there's a lot that we still don't know. We had a good hearing this past week in the House Oversight Committee, but we need more. The people need to know more, and hopefully we'll get testimony not only from those two public officials, but others in Minnesota, other state and local officials, so that we can shine a light on all these issues and the American people can make a decision for themselves.
The Democrats are making the case that, yes, there's fraud in Minnesota, but the president is using this as a political cudgel in a way. Does the fraud in Minnesota to you appear to stand out more than, I mean, I'm sure you could Google fraud for Medicaid and Medicare in every state in the nation. This isn't a new thing.
Yeah. Well, look, it's certainly very prominent in Minnesota. We know of the other 4 states that the federal government, that the Trump administration has shined a light on the problems involving that fraud. But Minnesota's the tip of the iceberg. It may be happening in other places. And, you know, one thing that has come forward in this first year of the Trump administration is the waste and fraud and abuse in federal and in state governments from that federal money that's flowing to the state governments. And the American people, Rich, they're outraged because it's their taxpayer money. If the programs are good and legitimate, that's one thing. But when when these funds are being misused and misappropriated, it's another. So let's get all the information out there. Let's let the Department of Justice have that information so that they can take whatever appropriate action they need to take.
Do you think that this will begin an effort in Congress to sort of redesign a system that can help protect against this type of fraud? That there has been fraud in Medicare and Medicaid for decades now. There was the massive PPE loan scandal that had happened. Does the government, and by government I mean the federal government and state governments too, do they need better systems in place to try to prevent this type of fraud from happening again?
There's no doubt about it. And with the technology that we have available to us today, it should be a no-brainer. The vice president talked about that just a few days ago, creating a new person within the Department of Justice to make sure that these types of matters are properly investigated. But it needs to be an A to Z effort, from making sure that the systems are in place to making sure that we send a big giant signal to these people who have misappropriated money and taken money wrongly, that it won't be tolerated and they will in fact face the consequences of the law.
All right, Congressman Kustoff, thanks for joining us. All right, President Trump watching the Middle East this Sunday. He's discussing possible next steps amid the unrest in Iran. We'll have a live report. That's coming up next.